April 1945, American soldiers stepped through the gates of a place they would never forget. What they encountered inside left a mark so deep it reshaped their souls. One man was struck mute for 3 days, unable to form a single word after seeing what lay beyond those fences. Another drafted a letter to his family, pouring out everything he'd witnessed, then burned it before sending, as if the truth was too heavy to pass on. A third tried to explain what he saw when he returned home years later, only to be met with disbelief, even from those who loved him most. These were real soldiers, real voices, and these are the things they struggled to say, the moments they tried to share with a world not yet ready to listen. It began with the arrival of the 45th Infantry Division at Dachau. On the 29th of April 1945, 19-year-old Private First Class John Lee Archer stepped into a nightmare he had never imagined. He had expected to find a military installation, perhaps a holding area for enemy combatants or prisoners of war. Instead, he found thousands of living skeletons, men, women, and children, barely clinging to life, their bodies hollowed out by starvation and cruelty. In his private journal, he wrote, "We thought we'd seen the worst of war. But this wasn't war. This was something else entirely." The stench struck them before their eyes could adjust, a thick, cloying odor that clung to the back of the throat, that seeped into their uniforms and stayed with them for weeks. Robert Persinger, one of the men who entered that day, described it not just as a smell, but as a taste, something you could feel coating your tongue, impossible to wash away. Many of the soldiers fell into a stunned silence. Words failed them. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, a hardened and respected commander who had led men through brutal campaigns, found himself at a loss after the liberation. He had survived combat, earned medals, faced death without hesitation, but the sight of the camp left him speechless. Decades later, in recorded interviews, he admitted, "I still don't have the words." Corporal James Hoy was assigned to take official photographs, a task meant to preserve the evidence, but time and again, he had to pause, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the camera steady. In a letter to his family, he tried to explain the unexplainable. A camera can show you what was there, but it can't show you what it felt like to stand in that place, to breathe that air, to see those faces. The world needed to know, and General Dwight Eisenhower made sure it would. Just days after the camp at Ohrdruf was liberated, he traveled there in person, walking the grounds, examining the evidence with his own eyes. Horrified and determined, he issued an urgent directive: American congressmen, journalists, and photographers must be brought to the camps immediately. He demanded full documentation film, eyewitness accounts, physical proof. He said, "Get it all on record now. Get the pictures, get the witnesses, because one day, someone will say, this never happened." Soldiers were ordered to record everything: photos, written statements, medical reports, personal testimonies. Private Alvin Barber of the 42nd Infantry Division later wrote, "I want to forget it all, but I can't, because someone has to remember. Someone has to carry this truth." The emotional weight broke many of them. Even the most battle-hardened veterans crumbled. Sargent, for example. McConnell, who had fought through North Africa, Sicily, and the hedgerows of France without flinching, sat down and wept when he reached Buchenwald. "I'd seen men die in combat," he said later. "That was war, but this was murder, on a scale I couldn't even begin to understand." Some soldiers, against orders, shared their meager rations with the survivors, desperate to offer any comfort they could. Though they were warned that rich food could kill the starving, they couldn't stand by and do nothing. Medic Bert Weston recalled, "You just wanted to do something, anything, to try to fix it, even if you knew it was too late." When these soldiers returned home, most of them stayed quiet. For decades, they said almost nothing about what they had seen. Families asked about the war, about battles, about fallen comrades, about their time overseas. The soldiers answered, but they skipped over the camps. They spoke of gunfire and strategy, of courage and loss, but the liberation, the bodies, the silence, those things remained locked inside. Leon Boss, an African-American soldier who helped free Buchenwald, didn't speak publicly about it for 36 years. When he finally did, he explained why. "Because I started hearing people say it didn't happen, and that's when I knew I had to speak. That's when I had to break my silence. Others lived with recurring nightmares, flashbacks, and deep anxiety symptoms we now recognize as post-traumatic stress. Benjamin Fenn, a young investigator collecting evidence for war crimes, had never seen a dead body before the war. At 27, he walked through death camps, documenting atrocities that would later be used in the Nuremberg trials. He said, "I was unprepared for what I found, but I had to do it. It had to be seen." But amid the horror, the soldiers also saw something else: resilience. The survivors, though broken, still reached out. Many were too weak to stand, but they crawled, they limped, they reached for the soldiers with trembling hands, wanting to thank them. Private Lester Tanner remembered one man, no more than 70 pounds, who grabbed his hand and kissed it over and over, tears pouring down his gaunt face. Tanner said, "I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like we came too late. Too many were already gone." Some of the survivors had been waiting for years, praying for this day. Children who had never known a life outside the barbed wire. Families torn apart, scattered across Europe. Soldiers did what they could to reunite them, posting names on bulletin boards, searching through records, making inquiries. Sometimes they found a match. More often, they found only silence, only absence. The photographs they took became more than images. They became proof, evidence, history. But for the men behind the cameras, each click was a memory carved into their minds. Signal Corps photographer J. Menhezop shot thousands of pictures across multiple camps. He said later, "I thought taking these photos would help me deal with what I'd seen. It didn't, but it had to be done. It was necessary." Those images spread across the globe in newspapers, in newsreels, in courtrooms. The world finally saw what these soldiers had seen. The truth could no longer be denied. Years later, as the veterans grew older, they began to speak. They visited schools, museums, memorials, knowing their time was limited. They wanted younger generations to understand not just the facts, but the deeper lesson, that hatred, when left unchallenged, leads to darkness beyond imagining. Again and again, they echoed the same message. "Don't let anyone tell you this didn't happen. I was there. I saw it." They stressed that the perpetrators were not demons or monsters. They were ordinary people, neighbors, fathers, workers. That, they said, was the most terrifying part. How normal everything had seemed to those who carried out these acts. For many, liberating the camps was the most meaningful thing they ever did, more significant than any battle, any medal, any victory. They had saved lives, restored hope, preserved the truth, but they also carried a burden that never left them. Harry Herder Jr., who served with the 4th Armored Division at Ohrdruf, kept his photographs hidden for 50 years. He couldn't bring himself to look at them. When he finally donated them to a museum, he said, "These aren't mine, they belong to history, they belong to the world." In the end, these soldiers never asked to become witnesses to one of history's darkest chapters. But when they were called, they answered, they documented, they testified. They remembered even when remembering hurt. Their words stand as a living testament. This happened, this was real, and it must never happen again. The last of the American liberators are now in their late 92nd or have passed on, but their voices remain, their images remain. Their message to us is clear: learn from the past, stand against hatred, speak up, never forget. Because those who survived depended on these soldiers to tell their story, and now it is our turn. We carry that responsibility forward. The reactions of these American soldiers to the Nazi concentration camps altered the course of history. The men who fought in World War II and liberated the camps became the witnesses the world desperately needed. The discoveries made by US troops at Dachau and Buchenwald gave Holocaust survivors a voice when they could no longer speak for themselves. The testimonies of American soldiers remain some of the most powerful evidence of what truly occurred. These eyewitness accounts remind us that hatred can destroy, but truth endures.